Hello, and welcome to our pre-recorded Bible study for June 30th, 2024. We're continuing to look at some of those stories from Sunday school that we don't always hear in the lectionary. And today we hear the story of Naaman, the general. And so we begin. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given him victory to Syria. All right, so now when we're talking about Syria here, really we'll talk about what's called here this kingdom of Aram Damascus. So Syria, the modern nation state of Syria would be similar up here. But Syria is referred to various locations, various bits of geography throughout the centuries. But for here, we're talking about this kingdom of Aram Damascus. Some Arameans came in, conquered Damascus, and then start conquering things here. And so this is what we look like. And again, we're dealing with Elisha in the northern kingdom. So you can see they share a border, and we'll actually see. Throughout much of then Second Kings, we get this is a conflict between Syria or Aram Damascus and Kingdom of Israel, but so this is about Naaman, the Syrian general. So he's a mighty man of valor, but we find out he's a leper, and as a leper, this is. The Syrians, the Arameans, didn't necessarily have the same kind of direct cleanliness rules, but this would have made him unclean. There's some debate over whether the word used here refers to what we know of as leprosy, or whether it just refers to some sort of skin condition. But for our purposes, that really doesn't matter. What matters is that he's got a skin condition that's unclean, that's making him so that he can't necessarily do his job, and he needs to get healed. And although it's not specifically mentioned in the text, we assume that he's tried everything that he can in Syria before we get to this next point, which is that when the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." And so here we get, again, one of the themes as we've been going through these stories is that God tends to use the little, the least, the forgotten in order to accomplish his purposes. And so we've got this powerful general who has found something he's powerless against, and instead gets desperate enough that he listens to this unnamed slave girl who's in the service of his wife. And the fact that she is willing to at least offer up and say, hey, he should go do this, sort of implies she's at least fairly treated well, which wouldn't necessarily be the case. But yeah, so again, this is God taking something that was bad. This girl had been kidnapped from her homeland and was enslaved. But now God's using her to accomplish his purpose in healing Naaman. So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." And so we're talking about this king, his lords, probably this guy named Hadadezer, or sometimes referred to as Ben-Hadad II, who's king of the Aram Damascus from about 865 to 842 BC. So that also gives you kind of a timeline of what's going on, what he's doing when we're working with here. And so Naaman went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And then I'll mention this in my sermon, but we're talking multiple millions of dollars worth of worth of money, worth of these metals, plus these 10 changes of clothing. So Naaman is sent by his king to go to the king of Israel. He's sent with all these gifts because he figures that's how this works, because that's how things work between kings, between the powerful people. You give them something, they give you something back. And you need to lavish them with gifts in order for them to do anything, and that's what we're doing. And so they go out and go. And Naaman goes to Samaria. And he brings the letter to the king of Israel, which reads, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God, to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me." All right, so again, who's this guy? Well, so this is King Jehoram, who's the son of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. So not as bad as Ahab, not as bad as his brother who was king before. He doesn't seem to actively worship Baal, but he doesn't tear things down. And he fights several battles with his Aram, Damascus, Syria, and so he's obviously skeptical of what's going on. He figures that Naaman has been sent to him with this impossible task that then will be a pretext for war. We sent our general for you to cure him, you didn't. Now we're mad about that, so we're going to invade you. So he's worried about that. And then he'll end up being killed by his general Jehu, and to kind of fulfill the prophecy that Ahab and Jezebel's descendants would all be wiped out because of how horrible they were. And so that's coming up. But in any case, so it kind of gives you a sense of King Jehoram, who doesn't want to take any responsibility for this general for coming from one of his enemies, is skeptical that this is on the up and up, and doesn't think he can handle this. So that's King Jehoram. All right. So, but then when Elisha, the prophet, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, so that he may know there's a prophet in Israel." So again, the king doesn't seem to have actually told Elisha. Elisha's been, figured this out, either as his own network or God reveals to him, you need to, this is going on, and so send Naaman to me and I'll take care of it. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. So again, he figures you do the same approach. I've got all this stuff. I've got all these gifts. I'm going to order you what to do. I need to be healed. You heal me, and you get all this stuff. Because that's how that transactional way is how not only did they think the world worked among kings, but how the world worked among gods. That I offer you this sacrifice, and then you do this for me, a very kind of quid pro quo kind of thing. And so that's what Naaman's expecting to happen. And Elisha sent a messenger to Naaman, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman's very angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Parphar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. So Naaman's unhappy, angry, because this isn't going how he thinks it should go. He thinks that the way this should have worked is that he came, got the stuff, comes to Elisha. Elisha will do some sort of fancy ritual, and then he'll be cured. Or Elisha will say, "Okay, you'll be cured, but in order to do this, you have to go on a quest and do some impossible things." But instead, the fact that Elisha doesn't even come to him himself, but sends him a messenger, Naaman thinks this is very dismissive of him. and that he's supposed to wash in the Jordan River, the river in Israel, not any of those rivers in Damascus. There's some debate over which rivers they are, but they were fairly extensive, parts of fairly extensive irrigation systems, and would have been pretty impressive. Even given away that hometown bias that Naaman would have of, our rivers are better than your rivers. So that's where he is. He's upset. He doesn't think this is how it should go, and he goes away angry. Unclear whether he's just pouting outside of Elisha's house or whether he starts making the walk back to Damascus, which is 100-ish miles, something like that. But then Naaman's servants came near and said, "My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" And so his servants go, "Well, wait a minute. He told you to do something. Is it really that hard? Why are we doing this? Why do we think this is not going to work? Why don't you just do what he says? What's the worst going to happen? Go and try this." All right, so he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And so this worked. Naaman does what what Elisha told him to do, and it works. Now the fun wordplay I'll mention in my sermon. Little child here is the same word that's used to refer to the slave girl. So he becomes like the slave girl because his skin becomes like a little child, just like her. So we've got this equality going on, that the rich and powerful become, and the poor and lowly become the same. All right, so now Naaman is cured and clean and is happy. All right, then Naaman returned to the man of God, Elisha. He and all his company came and stood before him. And he said, "Behold, I know there is no God in all the earth but in Israel, so accept now a present from your servant." All right, so again, Naaman still thinks this is how the world works. He's healed. This has given him a sign that God is the God of the God of Israel is the one true God. He needs to worship and serve him, but he's still thinking, well, wait, I need to give you prophet some stuff, out of thanks, which is okay. But all right. But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. All right, and so again, Naaman tries to give gifts to Elisha several times, but Elisha still stubbornly refuses it all. Because again, he didn't do this for payment. He didn't do it for anything. He did it because God told him to. He did it to help Naaman and thereby help people. Right. So then Naaman said, "If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord." All right, and so Naaman's going to go back and he's going to worship God, but he thinks he needs to build his altar to the one true God on dirt from Israel, because again, a lot of times you have these nations will have their gods, but their gods are limited or focused on specific locations, specific geographic areas, and so we got to bring some of that land with them to go that way. But in this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And he said to him, "Go in peace." All right, so what's this referring to? So Naaman recognizes, so he's going to serve God. He's only going to worship God, but he also knows that as part of his duties as a high official in Aram Damascus in Syria is that he has to go with the king into the temple of Rimmon. That's their version of Baal, to worship there. And the king apparently often, goes in with Naaman, but does so, with king might be getting older, frailer, leans on his arm, and so the king Naaman bows, and the king bows. Now Naaman's saying, well, if I bow, it's because I'm helping the king. I'm fulfilling that duty, not because I'm actually worshiping Rimmon. And Elisha says, yes, go in peace. So we've got that idea, and we can look at that idea some in terms of what, how you can, how and to what extent you can participate in some of the you can participate in rites of other religions, or do things that are in your duties of your job that might get in conflict. But Naaman recognizes this potential conflict, says, my heart's not going to be in it no matter what I do. And Elisha says, that's okay. All right. And then, of course, this whole idea, and especially the Elisha refusing the gifts, has been a subject of art in several different times. They try to give stuff to Elisha, and he refuses. All right. But then, just because Elisha took a vow of poverty doesn't mean everyone else around him is happy about that. And that's what this next kind of epilogue bit is. So, but when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, see, my master has spared this Naaman of Syria, in not accepting from his hand what he brought. But as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi followed Naaman. And when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, is all well? And Gehazi said, all's well. My master just sent me to say, there have now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. And Naaman says, be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and laid them on 2 of his servants. And they carried them before Gehazi. And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand, put them in the house, and he sent the men away, and they departed. He went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, where have you been, Gehazi? And he said, your servant went nowhere. But Elisha said to Gehazi, did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. So he went out from his presence with his skin white as snow. So Gehazi ends up trying to take advantage of Naaman's generosity. But if your boss is the prophet, he's probably going to figure out what you're doing, especially if it's not something you're not supposed to be doing. And so he ends up then getting cursed with leprosy. So he and his descendants will be unclean. All right, and then one of the other interesting points, one of the outside archaeological references to the house of David is this rock called the Tildan Stela, and it references that the king of Aram Damascus, so not Naaman's current king, it's the guy after him, kills Jehoram of Israel, the son of Ahab, and also Ahaziah, a king of the house of David. So, again, biblical account seems to have Jehoram being killed by Jehu after he's wounded in battle, and so maybe they're both claiming credit for things. But then this becomes proof not only that those 2 kings existed, but also that Ahaziah is referred to as a king of that, who's the king of the southern kingdom at this point, but whose mother is sister of Jehoram. So they've got that kind of connection going on. That there's a reference to this house of David, which otherwise hadn't been mentioned elsewhere. And so that was a big deal. There's still some arguments because you can kind of see there's some missing parts, and so it all depends on how you fill in some of those words. But that in general, it's accepted as proof that it's the of that. And so again, these around this time of Naaman and Elisha. Now Jesus mentions this. Naaman's mentioned once in the Bible, once in the New Testament, and it's by Jesus, which is in Luke 4. What we hear as gospel lesson today, and it's from when when Jesus is preaching in his hometown synagogue of Nazareth, but it's at the end as he's starting to point out that things might not be quite like he says, or like they want him to be. Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown. But in truth I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land, and Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath, in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. When the crowd heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. And they rose up and drove him out of the town, and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so they could throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went away." And that's kind of the other point we can have here with looking at Naaman, is a reminder that as much as we sometimes focus on how God in the Old Testament's working through the people of Israel, and God in the New Testament's working, then expanding it to all the world, that God's mission, God's purpose was for Israel to be a blessing to all people, and that God still cared. And we get these examples throughout the Old Testament where God works to bring faith brings a Gentile into faith, even though they're not an Israelite. Even though here again Naaman's had victories over Israel, and so has conquered and captured, and that's why he ends up having this slave girl that tells him where to go. Again, we can, like the people in Jesus' synagogue, that everyone would think, well, of course, why isn't God healing the lepers of Israel? Why is he healing this enemy general? He's he's a murderer, he's a butcher, he's enslaved our little children, or this little girl. He's an enemy of God. Why should we care? But God's love and purpose is for all people to come and turn to him and worship him, and that's what happens then with Naaman. That he's healed. That convinces him of who the true God is, and then he's able to go from there and continue to worship. And we see again how God uses this nameless slave girl as the one to share the message with Naaman of go see Elijah, go see the prophet. He will be able to heal you because everything else has failed. And then Naaman does. Naaman's looking for something more complicated. Go wash and be clean. And that's what happens. And it works. So again, that's Naaman, our Syrian general, proof and reminder that God cares for all people, that God uses the insignificant, the weak, to humble the strong, and how he works to bring all people together, united as his people. Thank you very much for listening.